tomorrow. I think we will have a big procession tomorrow. And I wonder if you would come in and start the procession, because tomorrow is Palm Sunday. And on that day, we celebrate the fact that Jesus came from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. And what was he riding?
A camel?
No camel. No horse.
Of course.
And that leaves an animal that you've seen at St. Timothy's called begins with a D.
Donkey?
Donkey!
They rode donkeys and camels.
Yeah, they did, but Jesus rode a donkey, and that's a whole great story that I'm going to tell you about probably this time next week, because today I just want everybody to start thinking, because tomorrow they're going to be carrying their palm branches in procession, and we'll be blessing them.
I don't think they rode horses.
Well, certainly not.
Maybe very, very special people.
Well, perhaps, yes.
Because
But what we had...
You can't see somebody in the Old Testament riding a horse.
Well, probably the thing to do is to go back and look at some of the chapters where we've read about how many animals they had. Do you remember how many times it talks about all the different animals they have?
I don't remember.
Well, that's all right. Sometimes it says how many donkeys they had, how many camels, how many sheep. So we know they were
I don't think
around.
they were like this. Get up, horsey, get up.
I know. They didn't do that, and they didn't say ride 'em cowboy. No, they didn't. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a book of the Bible which is not as long as the other ones, but it's called the Book of Lamentations. And so in order for me to talk to you about the Book of Lamentations, I just have to go over a couple things with you. Can you name a few emotions for me? Like feelings?
Sad, happy, mad, excited.
Yeah, those are some. And you even have faces for all of those too.
Okay, name one.
Happy, sad, angry, excited. Yay! Well, of course there are many more.
Yes.
But emotions are feelings, and so that means that they are our own.
This.
Yeah, they're our own. But it doesn't always mean that just because we have a feeling that it's right. Sometimes our feelings aren't right.
They go to your brain.
Yeah, they do. Well, sometimes when three people see something happen on television, for example, they may each have a different feeling about what they're seeing. One person, for example, may start laughing, and another one might start saying, "What?" and start crying.
And another person starts crying.
That's right. It can happen. Different ways that we respond to things in front of us.
Like it's like somebody has entered a universe, and then somebody cries, somebody laughs, and then somebody.
It's true. It's true. And some people, whenever they're happy, they cry. Yeah, some people only cry when they're sad.
Like, they just happy to, they just cry because they're happy.
Right. All of these emotions run together. Well, the book we're talking about today has a fancy name. It's called Lamentations. And in order to understand this book, we need to know what that word means. So, Lamentations is a book all about lamenting. Now, I know that doesn't help very much, because you don't talk to your friends every day and say, "Oh, I think today I'm going to lament."
And then they'd be like, "Huh?"
Yeah. So one way to think about the word lament it means something like very, very sad. So, when people lament, they're usually sad. Sometimes we have many sad feelings inside of us and we don't say a word. But there are other times when we're really sad and we want to talk about it. What do you do when you're sad, Betty? Do you tend to be really quiet, or do you want to talk about it?
Quiet.
Quiet. That's the way lots of people are. And some people, whenever they're lamenting, they have to say it out loud. So the book of Lamentations is all about how the Jewish people were sad and what they had to say about their sadness. So the real question I think you ought to ask is, why were the Jewish people so sad?
Because God was doing something bad. And I guess I don't know.
Well, it wasn't what they wanted God to do because they hadn't been listening. I imagine that sometimes we think about all of the times that we were sad and unhappy.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Well, speaking of that, well, God,
That's all right.
I was going to talk about Passover.
Well, we can talk about Passover because it is Passover also. But there's a good thing to talk about because in Passover, they have a lot of emotions in the Passover meal. But you see, I don't think that everyone writes down their feelings all the time. Like if you're sad, if you wrote all your feelings down, and then we would say, may I have your attention, may I have your attention. It's that time of the year when Betty is going to read all the things that she's been sad about ever since she was born. I don't think that would be something that we would do.
I'd be like,
Yeah. Yeah, I was sad when I didn't get my bottle, But if you'd been kicked out of your house and then you'd had your church destroyed by people, you might think about it a lot. And you might really be sad. Well, once Jerusalem was taken over and the temple was destroyed, people could never forget about how sad they were now and how happy they were when they lived in Jerusalem. Because now they weren't living in Jerusalem, and they couldn't even go to the temple with their friends, with their family, or their neighbors anymore. In fact, they don't have the same neighbors anymore.
Out of one eye.
Yeah, see, that's what would happen. Well, in the last few chapters, we've been talking about the 70 years that the Jews were held in captivity and how they couldn't go back home. And during those 70 years, remember what happened? The old people died, and their children and grandchildren were born.
Yes.
So the Jewish people needed to keep all their stories and their memories alive, or else their children and grandchildren might say, we don't ever want to go back to Jerusalem because we've never been there. We don't know anything about Jerusalem.
Like,
What's this temple?
I don't want to go anywhere. And what's a temple? Is it like this, or is it like this? Or
See?
Is it, wait, I don't even know anything.
That's exactly right.
Because I don't think there were schools back then because there would be no history.
Well, they didn't have schools like you have today. That's true. Now, do you know how often you have to listen to people that my age begin all of their stories with something like, a long time ago, when I was a little boy.
Or back in my day.
Yes, that's right, Betty. And usually, here's what happens when people start saying it. Here's what I know all the kids start doing when people like me say that. They go like this. Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. Do I have to listen to him again? Oh. So these people... Oh, yeah. Where can I take a nap? Let me pretend my eyes are really open when they want to be closed. But anyway, these people living at this time had to listen to all the old people telling all the old stories about what it was like living in Jerusalem. And in this book, there are really 5 really big laments or sad stories. Now, if you're keeping track of the dates, the 70-year captivity was from around 605 BC until about 536 BC. The book starts off with the people talking about what their neighborhoods and their city look like now. I guess you can say that what they are lamenting is how beautiful Jerusalem used to be. But now, really, if they go back and look at it, it looked like somebody had dropped a bomb on it.
Like, ooh, bomb.
Yeah.
Put it right here. And where do I get matches? Oh, here.
Yeah. So the only thing they had to go on were their memories. Yeah. Now, one of the really sad verses says, and this is right out of it, it says, "Is it nothing to you, all who pass by? Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me?" Now, sometimes we Christians use that on Good Friday when we talk about people walking past Jesus when he was on the cross. And another verse says, "See how distressed I am? I'm really hurting inside me."
I'm on a cross.
Yep, that's right. And you know the terrible pain. Terrible pain. And when we think that nobody cares about how upset we are, we sometimes feel really lonely when people don't understand.
Nailed to a cross.
That's right.
That's not
Now,
good.
do you ever think, Betty, do you ever feel like people don't understand what you're feeling inside?
Yes.
How will anybody ever know what your feelings are?
If I don't know, I don't know.
I guess you have to tell people, right?
I guess, and then I have to explain it really well, and then they would understand.
Yeah, and you know, we try to understand people when they're sad and when they're lamenting. But sometimes it's
Or
difficult.
like this.
Yeah, it is because we hadn't been there. But in this book,
Now
the people are thinking out loud. You know how it is when you're thinking inside, if your words started popping out and you were thinking out
Yes.
loud?
That
Well-
literally happened like 30 minutes ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's what happens in Lamentations.
'Cause I was just saying something in my head and then it started coming out.
And it popped out.
Yeah,
Oh,
like
my goodness. Oh, my
now
goodness.
it's a no.
Well, that's what Lamentations is about. It's about people kind of thinking out loud. And in one verse, they say, "Because the Lord's great
Like
love."
this.
Yes, that's true. Because of the Lord's great love, we're not destroyed. Everything else is, but we're not. So the people realize that even though their homes and their temple are all destroyed, they're still alive. The question for us is, what we do when we read a book like the Book of Lamentations. I mean, it's like when you listen to your family and friends when they're really upset. Have you ever heard your parents or your sister sound like they're upset about something?
I don't know.
Well, that's good, because that means that in your house, people don't yell and scream and act like they're upset about something very often. But let's say, for example, you had a friend whose dog died. You know that person would feel sad, wouldn't they?
Yes.
And what would you do so that you could make your friend feel better?
Well, I know how it's like when your dog dies. So I just tell them how to feel better, I guess.
Have you ever lost a dog?
I just said I know what it feels like. So
But
yes.
I wanted you to be able to share why it is you know what it feels like, because
I had 2 dogs.
you had 2 dogs,
Yes.
and then they died.
Yes.
And
One
they-
ran away and one just was old.
And you felt sad.
Yes.
And that's why you can tell somebody else that you know what it feels like. So that's wonderful. Or what about if somebody has to move away from the house they always lived in?
No.
Do you know what that feels like when you have to move out of a house you were born in, for example? Well, how do you know that?
Because I lived in a house. Then I moved to another house.
So you know what it feels like when you look outside and you don't have the same neighbors anymore.
Yes.
And do you ever miss the old neighbors?
I didn't know anyone
Okay.
except for the people. There was people across the street, and I knew them. But now I know a lot. And now I know people in my new neighborhood.
Well, that's good when you get to know people. But think about what happens when somebody moves away and they move out of the state. And they're in a different state. They're living, let's say, like you have a grandma who lives in what state? Missouri? Missouri. So you don't get to see her that often.
Yeah.
So you must feel sad when you don't see her. So what happens is we can know what it feels like when somebody moves away or we don't see them anymore. Or I'll think of something else that can make you feel sad. Have you ever seen bullies in school? What do bullies do?
Well, we watched a video in counseling, so, or counselor. Like, they can be physically, like, they can be physically mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they can hurt you or look like they're gonna hurt you. And other times they can, like, they can be mad at, like they can bully like what you look like.
So sometimes it's because sometimes it's physical, but sometimes it's what they say.
Yeah.
And they make you feel bad.
And it's also name calling.
Name calling. So how do people feel when this takes place, if bullies are doing that?
Sad.
Yeah, I think usually sad. And you see, there were a lot of bullies in the Bible that we've read about, making the Jews feel really, really bad. Like the way the Egyptians were treating the Jews, remember, before the Passover? So there were a lot of bad things happening to the people.
And the way the Pharaoh treated
That's right.
the servant.
That's right. Pharaoh wasn't very nice.
No.
And then this week this week with being Holy Week, we're going to see how the bullies treated Jesus.
And I remember I read a book about Passover, and now I'm sad because he made people drown their sons, their babies.
It's true. The story of Passover is difficult. In fact, I'm going to tell you more about that. I'd like to do a Passover meal with you. I do that sometimes with people. Now, whatever the reasons are for telling how upset they are, if they say these things to you, then they must really trust you. People wouldn't come to you and say, Betty, I want to tell you what's bothering me, unless they trusted you, unless they believed that you cared for them. So the problem for us is that we can't always fix everything. You are trustworthy. But the problem is, Betty, when people come to see us, we can't always fix everything, can we? As much as we'd like to. Some people are very, very upset. Their problems are really big. And so then they tell us our problems. So what can we do? We can always pray for them. And why do we do that? Well, there's a reason. Because when we think that something needs to be fixed, who do we know who can really fix everything?
Jesus and God?
That's right. And so, we can pray with them, and they can pray for us also, and for themselves. Years later, we find out sometimes that something we said or something we did when someone was upset was something that they have never forgotten, because maybe one day when they're living in Alaska, somebody's going to say, when I was a little girl, I had a friend named Betty, and Betty said something to me when I was very sad that made me feel better. And that's what happens. In my life, when I think, Betty, about some of my friends from when I was in kindergarten or first or second or third grade, I think about them sometimes. And I think about some of the things that they taught me and that I was able to teach them. And the fact that we said things to each other to make each other feel better. So one day when the Jewish people returned to Jerusalem, they kept on reading the book of Lamentations because they never wanted to forget how sad they were at a time when they weren't allowed to go there. So the book of Lamentations is one of the shortest books, but each word is really important. The book ends with the people speaking to God with some really good words. They say, "You, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures forever and ever." You see, they knew that even though they didn't have their houses or their temple anymore, even when they went back, that God was still in charge, and that there is a heavenly Jerusalem that nobody can destroy. They end the book by asking God to restore everything and to put back what had been destroyed. They wanted God to know that they were hoping that he wouldn't be too angry with them for some of the things that they had done when they doubted him. Now, you remember from our previous chapters that God sent lots of important prophets to warn the people, to change their ways? And you remember they never listened? Well, so there they are in a strange land, living with people other than their old friends in Jerusalem, and wondering what would happen next. Sadly, there would continue to be problems, even when they finally were able to go back to Jerusalem. I guess you can say that sometimes we forget the lessons that we've learned. And then, when we get in trouble again, we remember that God always gives good advice. So you know something, Betty?
What?
We need to be better followers of God's good advice. Because then when we have lamentations, talking to God is like going right before him and him giving us a big hug. And you know something, Betty? Every time you come here to see me, as you come in and then later when you're getting ready to leave, you always give me a big hug. And you know, your hugs always make me feel better. And that's what prayer is like. Prayer is just like God reaching out and giving you a big hug. There's nobody in the world who gives a hug to me like you do, Betty. And there is nobody who can give a hug like God. I love you, Betty.
Okay.
Thank you. Everybody have a great Holy Week.